All right, welcome back to Data Nerds. This week we have a special guest, Jason Tuori. Jason, can you tell us a little bit about yourself for those two people that may not have heard of you?
Well, first, I have a question. Am I one of the data nerds, or are you guys the nerds and I'm just a guest? Because that might be the deal breaker.
I don't know what's the deal breaker. Is it bad?
He's a
Yeah,
nerd.
you're
He's
you're
a
hedging.
nerd.
Yeah, you're hedging that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. Been listening to the regular I mean, you guys now have a spinoff of a podcast too, which is that's very very Family Guy and Cleveland Show-esque of you. I'm a sports physical therapist based out of Rochester, New York. I'm at a out-of-network practice, sports performance practice called Mana Performance Therapy. Work with a variety of athletes, and one of our main team roles is working with the Rochester Junior Americans in the NAL League, so Tier 2 junior hockey. We do some sports science and rehab work with them. We also, based out of our facility, Next Level Strength and Conditioning, do some rehab work with the Rochester Nighthawks, and just kind of a variety of hockey, lacrosse, soccer, basketball, kind of general athletes, depending on the season. Baseball being one right now, assuming this podcast goes out in the spring. You don't hold it until the fall, because that would sound really weird then if we're like, oh man, we're just
it's going out tomorrow, so
oh, well, there you go. Perfect. Just living day to day like me. Yeah, previously was with University of Rochester for about 3 years in both the rehab and the performance setting. Worked with Rochester, New York FC and the MLS Next Pro as their sports performance coach, and kind of in and out of hospital-based and private practice, orthopedic and sports PT prior to that. So also have a podcast where I talk about research. So what a crossover episode, right?
So,
Exactly.
Jason, do you still consider yourself a running PT? Because I think, Mike, Brian, and I know you from like 3 or 4 years ago, and we feel like you used to be pretty big in that culture. You're kind of moving away from us, bro. What's going on?
I'm slowly drifting away from distance running, and I would say that largely my interest in kind of like the endurance athletic space has always been on the kind of conditioning side, aerobic adaptations, anaerobic adaptations. But my trade as a runner was in middle distance running, which I find means that you can either drift up or drift down depending on what is most interesting. And yeah, I mean, did a lot of working with cross country, both in the performance space and on the rehab side. I've kind of gotten more interested from an injury standpoint in things that are running related in other sports. So I would say that's kind of where I'm at right now. Is the running side of things is the most interesting to me, kind of now, probably regardless of sport. And I don't know, high speed running is just it's a lot more fun.
For sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All the running in hockey, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, have you seen them train?
Yeah.
They're just they sprint like 2 or 3 times a week. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And I think a big reason that I know we wanted to talk to you was also your course that both Pat and I have taken, where you guys teach about, I guess, especially Tyndek dynamometry, but dynamometry / use of tech in general, which is kind of what we're trying to disseminate here. So I don't know. I don't know where to start.
I know where to start. Here we go. All right. So me, Mike, and Brian are gonna guess every piece of tech that you own, Jason.
Oh boy.
And I have no idea what the reward or the punishment will be, but
I will mail you an entire case of Wegmans ginger seltzer if you get this correct.
All right, here we go. All right. So we'll start it off. You got Hawkins Dynamics plates.
Correct.
All right. You got those other plates you're not supposed to use for force testing, but you use them for force testing.
Yes, the vernier goes. They are education-based plates.
Yes, you got a Voltra.
I do have, yes, the Beyond Power Voltra.
You got Tindek.
We have Tindek.
Got Active Force.
We do have Active Force.
You got Peak Force Dynamometry calf box.
We do have the Peak Force systems. Yes.
You got timing gates.
We do have timing gates. Do you have to say
the brand? I don't know the brand. If
we're
really
let's keep going though. Let's keep going though, because we're hot right now.
We are hot right now. Let me think.
You said we, but it's all Pat here. He said
you
all
got
the ones
nothing else. Oh my god.
I got VBT. So the OBR.
We have the Vitruve, but we'll keep riding out on VBT.
Okay,
that was good.
Are you using any kinematic
Vol Dynamo?
We are demoing a Vol Dynamo. Yes.
Look at that. All right, let's go. That's all I got.
Okay.
Do you have any other like Vald Nordboard or the weird thing to test your adductors?
Not the Force Frame or Nordboard right now. We're also demoing some of the Force Dex plates. The one that you're not gonna get unless you have one more guess on an inline dynamometer.
Do you have the Meloc one?
We do not have the Meloc. It's the Pitch 6 Force Board, which is a small climbing company out of Utah, and we're demoing their product. Also, it's essentially the American Tindek.
Oh, gotcha.
Because they're a small climbing company that makes fingerboard training pieces. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's pretty good though.
Damn. Oh man, come on.
Do you know how many gymnastic straps I own?
Yeah, that's why he knows all that.
No.
Yeah, that's impressive.
So I guess I got personal interest here. So my coworker has a Voltra, and I feel like we've seen some interesting things come from what you guys have put on Mana for using the Voltra. Mm-hmm. What are some usage you guys have found, especially with like the hockey or lacrosse players, for that?
Yeah. So for those not familiar with what the Beyond Power Voltra is, it's essentially looks like a small portable cable trainer. There are a couple different mounts. You can just kind of mount it on any kind of stable surface rack. It has a cable that goes out to 72 inches. So it's not going to be like you're going to sprint across the gym with this thing, but it's good enough. You shouldn't, because something bad's going to happen to that. It's good enough for any kind of dynamic cable-based motion, whether it's horizontal or whether you anchor it to like the bottom of the squat rack and use it for a vertical pull, or the top of a squat rack and use it for a different vertical pull. The max load on it, if you're using it as a cable trainer, so it has a number of different functions. Cable trainer up to 200 pounds of resistance with the capacity to add eccentric overload to whatever percentage you want. So I could pull 30 pounds concentric and pull myself back with 200 pounds eccentric if I wanted to. I don't usually go more than 100% of eccentric because people are not ready for that, and they're barely ready for 100% eccentric. So that's one of the training functions. Another one of the training functions is the damper setting, which is the same level of damper, kind of concentric flywheel. That's the technology in like a Concept 2. So the harder you pull, the more resistance you get out of it, with settings from 1 to 10 being the kind of like the least amount of base resistance to the most amount of base resistance of the flywheel. And then you've got a couple other settings like resistance band, where you can kind of set what you want your end range weight to be, and it kind of exponentially scales up as you're pulling outward. Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, you can just like use resistance. I don't use that setting very often, but I appreciate that they played around with it, because we have rogue bands. And then you have a couple testing settings that are really interesting. You have a regular isometric setting that can test up to 400 pounds. And it starts when you start from an isometric test. So it actually has a pretty decent capacity to test rate of force development if the rest of the conditions are pretty good, because you don't have to time your repetition to something counting you down as 3, 2, 1. It will start as soon as you reach the threshold of like 5 newtons or whatever it is. And then the linear isokinetic setting, which is probably the real money in it, which is, if you're familiar with isokinetic testing, typically you kind of see as rotational torque-based isokinetic, like the HUMAC norm or the RIP Biodex. But the rotational-based isokinetic testing you kind of think of as every degree, we're keeping a consistent speed through the range, but the amount of force that you can put into it is going to change throughout the range based on muscle length tension. If we're thinking about single joints, with linear isokinetics, we're kind of thinking about more of this as like movement patterns or kind of complex movement. But the principle of the speed stays fixed to whatever you set, and the force is going to adjust however much you're putting into it throughout that range. It's only a concentric setting as of right now, but this group throws patches up like every few months, and they actually added the isometric and isokinetic settings once the device was already out. So I think the actual trainer itself has the capacity to probably do a lot of stuff that isn't even programmed on it yet.
So those are just like software patches that they just like push out. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, because the hardware is there. I mean, it's an electronic cable trainer that it has an eccentric set weight function, which means, and it has an isokinetic concentric setting, which means it very likely has the capacity to do an eccentric test. It just probably doesn't have the software written for it right now. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the majority of what we use that for. The other aspects of like every single repetition, it's giving you velocity-based feedback on it. So it essentially also has a VBT unit built into it, and you can set it to read mean velocity or mean power or peak or whatever you want to see for every repetition of an exercise. So priced at $2,100 is very, very low for all of that stuff altogether.
Yeah, and not being a subscription.
Yes, and free software with tablet-based software that kind of shows you some like force time curves and stuff like that. It's pretty slick. And yeah, I mean, I think when you see some of the price tags on like VBT units alone, isometric units, just cable trainers, like an Anchor is what, like $600 or something like that. Yeah, this thing's like they should probably charge more for it, personally.
How often do you end up using that in clinic?
Multiple times a day. Like at this point, anytime I'm going to use any kind of cable exercise, that's going to be the thing that I pick anyway, because I look at the Anchor and then I look at this and I'm like, why would I do that? Yeah, I mean, not to throw shade on the Anchor, but it's just not as accurate. I've used an inline cell to measure out what the resting weight on some of those attachments are, and they can be up to like 5 pounds off, which is problematic because they have 5 pound increments. So yeah, I use it. Yeah, I use it every day. I don't necessarily use the isokinetic setting every day, but I mean, seeing probably 50 right now, maybe 50% hockey players and then 50% everything else. A relatively high percentage of hip pathology on my caseload, or kind of like core muscle type injury things. We use it for a lot of rotational training and eccentric overload of any single joint exercise that we're trying to train.
So you end up using that more for training rather than for like testing?
Yeah, I'll break it out for some linear isokinetic testing. If I'm going to isometric test, I end up setting up a Tyndek or a pitch, just like a regular inline cell, just because it ends up being faster. using a couple gymnastic straps anchored and then pulling, versus having to kind of get the full strap anchor set up and then program out. It's a couple extra clicks that I just would rather not do because I don't have to.
Yeah. Do you then I'm just thinking about like the setup at Next Level. Do you like essentially end up leaving like stuff on a rack? Like do you just have like a Tindeck rack that you would leave set up, or do you?
Yeah. If the gym wasn't so busy and like a multi-use facility where teams will come in and train and things like that, I would do that. There's a future where we have a bigger rehab space and we're kind of like, well, Mike, you probably haven't been to Next Level recently, but there's a lot of construction going on right now because they are about to finish building out a third rink where St. John Fisher is going to play next year. So, yeah.
Screw Fisher.
Naz could play there if they want. They got to just sign a different contract, and yeah. So the facility is going to expand. The Next Level and Mana are going to expand at some point, and we'll have a bigger rehab space where ideally we have our own rack inside of a rehab space that we just leave stuff set up, because that's the extra barrier to entry that we talk about this all the time in the course, is reduce the barrier to entry, leave some stuff set up here or there where you can that doesn't get in the way, and just make that setup time that much faster. So you don't look at it and go like, nah, I don't feel like doing that today. That's too much work.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing at my clinic. Like we just have it on a squat rack. And so it's like, in most of the time, I'm really just testing knee extension strength anyway. So then it's like already set up like at roughly the right length, the Tindeck that I have.
Exactly. You only have to make minor adjustments here or there, and it's already there. So you have no excuse not to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Pat, were you going to ask something?
I was going to say, we just leave our nice Humac chair just open up to the public with the knee extension ready to go.
Yeah, we don't take apart our Humac every night. We leave it set up.
Yeah, we leave that completely set up. But like to your point though, like I've tried all the upper extremity testing for the Humac, and like even that I've done probably 10 times now, and it still is pretty hard and like time consuming to set up. And also, I don't know, sometimes I just find the Tindeck setup, I'm just like, this is so fast. You just get them on the ground and attach it to the squat rack and go. Like
you attach it to the Humac and then you go.
All right, I'm gonna have you lie on the floor here and attach a strap around the bottom post. All right, here we go.
That reminds me, actually, Pat, when we had talked in Portland about the the rotational test on the Humac, with grip being a potential rate limiter for external rotation. Have you tested that out since, where you've strapped the wrist in and or used like wrist straps around the handle?
I have, and I actually was like 10% stronger with a wrist strap, especially with like concentric external rotation, just because you're not relying on that grip strength anymore. So I haven't done it since we talked about it. It's a good reminder. I want to try it out again to kind of see, with fresher arms, because I know I cooked my arms before I did that testing.
You threw a bullpen first, and then you tested it out.
Yeah, exactly.
As a quick, like, for those, because that inside story is not going to translate well to the podcast.
Right.
But Pat and I were talking about testing external rotation, isometric external rotation torque, and how since I've been doing it with a cuff around the wrist, taking basically the wrist extension and grip out of the equation completely, the shoulder external rotation torque and normalized torque values that I see across all athletes, regardless of overhead athlete or not, are so much higher than what was previously reported in a lot of the isokinetic studies, and some of the isometric studies that were maybe not as great from a methodology standpoint. But we suspected that one of the rate limiters for some of the isokinetic shoulder external rotation torque output is still someone's grip strength, because when you think about the internal rotation, you're just pulling over and you can use your palm. The grip is not going to be the rate limiter, but you still have to hold on to a handle when you're doing the external rotation test isokinetically. And for somebody who has a pretty strong shoulder, the grip might be the rate limiter in that circumstance. And I suspect that's still the main reason why we see that.
Yeah. And, like for someone like me who is really an upper extremity athlete, like,
yeah, exactly. It's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah. Me after biking 60 miles. Yeah. My shoulder. Yeah, exactly. There was a difference we saw, but like I said, it was a while back, and I should do some more testing on it to see if that hypothesis holds true. But so far,
and then that has big implications then for like ER/IR ratios. Like I know you guys talked about in the course, the Dungeons and Dynamometers course when I took it, that like it's probably closer to 1-to-1. ER/IR then.
And I mean we see some baseball pitchers that are like 1.3. And I mean, we don't need to get me riled up right now, but
come on, get him jazzed up. Get him jazzed up.
Probably much less about the agonist-antagonist ratio and what the actual normalized torque is in each direction. Because you could be really weak and have a quote unquote good ratio, and I still feel not so good about that. So that's my abbreviated rant. Yeah,
this guy loves ratios. Big ratio guy, right?
Not true.
So then, just because I only have a Tyndek, so I'm curious more about like how you use Tyndek. Like, what are some of the like more common, like, I guess, muscle groups or actions that you end up testing, and like setups, like have you played with, etc.
Yeah, I should say, kind of in regards to the brand or Tyndek, we're brand agnostic. We don't have any financial or really like rooting conflicts of interest. The reason we show so much with the Tyndek is because it is the cheapest, most easily market accessible, highest load, easiest to use, free software, like kind of the average of all of the things that you would look at of, man, there's no way my boss can say no to this. That's the dynamometer that we tend to use because it's probably the most practical for most clinicians.
Hear that, Tyndek, sponsor us. We can have a Tyndek.
You guys can have a conflict of interest. I cannot. I mean, the most common, like looking through my clinic database, because I work with hockey athletes, I think the highest end we have is hip adduction, and then after that, probably hip abduction, knee extension. Outside of that, I mean, seated knee flexion and plantar flexion, but not with an inline cell. We use the P4 Systems calf box. And that's just because plantar flexion is something that's extremely hard to dial in because you have to test it in high degrees of dorsiflexion and maintain dorsiflexion while somebody is going into their peak plantar flexion torque.
That reminds me, just quick question there. After like our Dungeons and Dynamometers, we talked about the using like a medical boot or something, or not.
Oh yeah, medical, I ended up getting one, and I've been using it.
Yeah. Is that like helpful for it?
It certainly standardizes it. I mean, I just ordered a post-op walking shoe off of Amazon, and I've been putting everybody in that when I test them because of the variability in footwear, right? So this at least standardizes the interface between the device and someone's ankle. Previously, it's like, well, somebody could come in with a Hoka, and there's a ton of compression through the midsole. Or even worse, somebody comes in with a minimalist shoe and there's no longitudinal bending stiffness in the shoe whatsoever. So they lose they're basically putting all of their plantar flexion into their midfoot instead of into their first MTP. They're not even transferring the force from ankle into first MTP. And so we have a really hard time keeping them in dorsiflexion, and we don't see high force outputs. So I was like, yeah, we got to figure that out. So got a post-op shoe after the course that I taught in Providence, where one of the participants brought his prototype in, and I was like, oh, that's a good idea. You put a post-op shoe on there. And he was like, oh yeah, this is my wife's post-op shoe, like from when she fractured her foot a while ago. Well, that's cool, because that's a really good idea. So it's, it has effectively 100% longitudinal stiffness. It doesn't bend at all. And so it fulcrums all force that is coming from the plantar flexor directly into the plate, minus some from, you're still going to get drift of the foot coming out of the shoe. You got to Velcro strap them down, but like it's better than having somebody wear their regular shoes.
Yeah, we love rigid levers here.
We love rigid levers.
So now, because I don't have a peak force calf kit, have you tried that at all in the like jerry rigged like
the squat rack setup where you're laying in supine? And the only time I do that is to have people train in it so that they get visual feedback if we're doing like isometric training. I don't think it's a valid test, because it's almost impossible. What Mike is referring to, this is going to be bad for audio only listeners. Is somebody's basically supine on the ground with their foot up on the side of the squat rack, and they scoot down so that their thigh is parallel to the vertical post of the squat rack. A strap is wrapped over the top of their knee. It goes past the first bar of the squat rack. An inline cell is then in between that and is attached to the second bar on the squat rack. And then you kind of anchor them down with at least 50 to 60 pounds of preload, and then they go into plantar flexion. And because the strap is lined up over the top of the thigh, but in line with the first MTP, it should theoretically replicate the same line of pull, and it creates an inline cell version. The issue with it is that it's just too hard to strap them down and keep them in that position, and to not have them basically like a leg press against the post. But it's good enough for training if you've got someone where you want to do some isometric training with visual feedback. That calf kit doesn't have any kind of like Bluetooth app or visual ability to do that. So you could have somebody just kind of looking at the iPad, hit a 100% effort, and then anchor your isometric training off of that 100%.
So somewhat similar setup that me and my coworker played around with after I went to your course in January in Portland.
The wrong Portland.
I'm not going to disagree. I'm kind of agnostic to whichever one is better. They both have their qualms. They both have their positives. One has a basketball team. Sorry, a pro one. So
I was going to Maine Celtics are a pro team.
Okay,
I mean, that's technically true. Yeah.
So we set up one of our like metal plyo boxes in the middle of a squat rack, and then put one of the Vald force decks on top, had the person sit on a taller box, and then put pins in the middle of the two bars that kind of go like horizontal. And these pins have safety clips on the other side. I don't know the load capacity of those. So needless to say, you could still blow through those. But anyway, did that, and then got a ratchet strap. So put that over the knee, and then just like crank until got desired dorsiflexion, and went from there. Did not trial like an actual test. Did like a few like, I'll give this kind of a go. Oh, I don't know. Seems all right. But again, the whole conversation we talked about earlier, where it's like the test setup is enough to be like, well, do I really want to fucking do this? You
No
know?
shot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Honestly, the best, kind of the best, like best flow setup I've seen with this has been with a seated calf raise machine with the feet cut off, which is like, okay, yeah, now you have to have a seated calf raise machine in the corner of your space that is non-functional unless you want to use it for ISO training. But feet cut off, force plates underneath where the feet would be, so that, you know, the person just puts their feet on the force plates. You send the pad down, but instead of the like pin clipping into like one notch or the other notch, you take it out completely and you replace it with a ratchet strap. And you ratchet strap the pad down onto their thigh so that you can adjust exactly how much preload goes in. And then from there, you standardize if you're going to, you know, test everybody or test a whole team or whatever. You at least knew that if their knee was lined up with their toe and everybody started with 80 pounds of preload, like, hey, that's the equal condition that we're testing this thing in. And that probably means more than anything else.
Yeah, for sure.
Man, that's plantar flexion's like one of the few metrics that I really care about, and
it should be
should
be the single metric that you care about working with all of your runners.
Yeah. And it's just, I mean, I just got to get the calf kit there.
Calf kit runs you $550. It's probably worth it.
Probably worth it. Probably worth
it. I'm also, I guess I keep dominating all the questions. Does anyone have other questions?
Yeah. Brian's been sitting in the back row, you know, with his hood up.
Patiently waiting. Someone else.
Yeah. I mean, my only question is like your testing battery. I know you said you work with teams and stuff like that. I mean, depending upon the number of players on the team, what kind of stuff are you doing? How quick does it get done? Does it kind of do you guys have time allotted for that in preseason? And then, like, I guess this is a huge loaded question. And then how often are you testing that throughout the season?
That's why he was sitting on that question, guys.
He was cooking.
I mean, I can speak to like the junior Amherst preseason testing. We do counter movement jump on force plates. We have some sprint testing. So because of the layout of our facility, the longest flying 10 sprint that we can get is a 15-yard entry, 10-yard fly. So it's still, for all intents and purposes, testing acceleration more than it's testing top speed. But that's the space that we have. And kind of when you look at like, what's the top speed that somebody's going to hit on the ice? It's usually after about 20 to 30 yards of sprinting. So it's probably on the shorter end of what would actually get somebody close to their top speed. So we test that over ground as a sprint, and then we also test the same distance on the ice. Unsurprisingly, those two measures are the strongest correlated measures because we run all the data on that. So we had our plates, counter movement jump. We do hip AD and abduction, peak torque to body weight testing isometrically. I've kind of started to do, we have a couple of other training groups that when we do start to change, like consider changing a testing battery, we demo it out on like some other training groups first, you know, less important training groups. And so what I tried recently, and honestly, I liked it, was we don't have a force frame, but what the force frame is good at from a quick screening standpoint is it's a bilateral AB, bilateral A deduction test, two separate tests. Bilateral is not the same as a unilateral test, which sounds like a stupid thing to say, but it's only ever going to be rate limited by the weakest limb, which is why you won't really see large asymmetries on a force frame. And if you do, it's usually because there was some kind of pad instability or their body was actually not fully lined up in the device. Because an isometric test it doesn't move. And if there is a significantly higher output on one side, the resultant force has to create movement. So yeah, you're only ever going to be rate limited by the weakest limb on what your bilateral hip test is. So I basically rigged up a bilateral test with 2 inline cells, both pulling for AD and then pulling a single cell outward, so that it just created one number score, and normalizing that to their peak torque to body weight, and then basically just stratifying if anybody is, who's below average, who's above average. Anyone who's 1 standard deviation below average, they get an individual breakout. Like, hey, do you have FAI? Like, have you had a previous adductor injury? That kind of stuff. Because the whole goal with like team testing, both on the performance and the medical side, is that the sensitivity of the test should be relatively high. It should be able to pick up on like huge outliers. It should also establish some kind of baseline norm that we think is important for some kind of KPI. And, in the case of hockey, it's like hip health, because 50% of our injuries, but even a higher percentage of our non-traumatic injuries are at the hip and groin. We may have a higher incidence of a traumatic AC joint and concussions, but our overuse injuries are always that kind of in the hip area. So that's one of our big ones. We previously did do some shoulder internal and external rotation. It just took so long because you have to get internal and external rotation on 2 arms. There's no way to do that like bilaterally really well. So we've kind of skipped that at the group level, but if somebody comes in with a known AC joint injury, they get a specific shoulder test. So that's kind of what we're gravitating towards on the sports medicine model, is like we probably need to, because we aren't allotted that much time from a testing standpoint. I guess that kind of goes to the like they get to camp on a Sunday. By the following Sunday, everything needs to have been done already. And they're already they're hitting the ice hard. Like it's questionable whether some of the metrics that we get sometimes are like, is this real, or are they under so much fatigue that the reason they've scored poorly on this test is just because they're fatigued from all the other stuff that we're doing. So we have that. And then we kind of take the like, all right, if somebody has a known injury on their, medical history, they're going to get this individual breakout at some point as an individual session, like individually scheduled medical session. Let's see what else we got. Some of the like kind of strength stuff, like look at projected 1 repetition max with bench press, trap bar deadlift things. We've used Vitru for that as kind of a replacement for 1 rep max testing, or even just kind of the traditionally structured 3 rep max testing where you actually are having somebody hit failure. We've gone more towards the using velocity based training to estimate their 1RMs, given that they hit a certain, we assume a certain high level of effort once they drop below a certain velocity. Yeah, that's pretty much the majority. Oh, we did. This was a fun one. Last preseason, the other thing we were thinking about was like some kind of measure of lateral power. And so I thought about like a lateral, kind of lateral bound for distance, but the rate limiter for a single leg test is always some kind of like landing instability, or even kind of takeoff instability. But beyond that, it's like the rate limiter for any kind of single leg jump test is always sticking the landing. So it's more of a landing test than it is a propulsive test. And if I don't really, I want to test lateral propulsive power, my thought was, let me have them do a single leg bound to double leg land to kind of create more stability. And then I ran all of those metrics against their hip abductor and adductor peak torque to body weight, and it had 0 correlation, not even in the slightest. And given that, I now think that the single leg bound to 2 leg land is still probably the rate limiter, still probably the landing. They're still adjusting how far they're jumping to be like still needing to stick a double leg land. So my thought, as I've kind of redesigned that and trialed this out with some other individuals, is getting them on a slide board where we're kind of measuring out where the the end point that we would want to continue moving is, because VBT units also have a cable that can break if you go too far. And getting basically a peak power or average power metric on how what's the average power through a lateral skate movement on a slide board, and use that as our like lateral power based metric.
I remember when y'all on Mana posted about this, I turned over to my coworker. I'm like, how does he keep on getting away with this? How does he always cook? Man is always cooking.
Yeah, I mean,
keep on getting away with this.
A substantial portion of my day is just thinking. So eventually you're gonna hit on something.
I guess so.
Call this dude like Aristotle.
Yeah, like Russ should just like build in part of my job description is just like, like think for a little bit, and then that'll help.
Yeah. Yeah. But so have you found like any correlation in terms of that test? Like what have you seen come from doing that now?
Yeah, I don't have a high enough number on the lateral power, the lateral
Gotcha.
skate power thing. We haven't done it with a full team yet.
Gotcha.
But that's, if we have the time for it in our next preseason testing battery, that's something that we're going to move towards, because it is actually, because we have so many slide boards and VBT units, it's the kind of thing that we could have multiple running at the same time and collect everybody pretty fast.
So have you thought about just buying a 1080 Sprint and just getting it on the ice?
I have loosely considered that, and then seen the price tag and not considered it anymore. Yeah. Not until. Yeah. I think we are, though, getting into the era of like linear isokinetic is about to get a lot cheaper. Actually, probably all isokinetic testing is about to get a lot cheaper, especially when you get some units like the Vulture, what we've already talked about, coming in at a price point that's like, whoa, that's impressively low given what it does. And the same trend that you see with a lot of other tech, which has exploded in the last 5 years. Of originally it's a hand grip jammer that's $1,700 in hospital systems in the 90s, and it does one thing and nobody uses it, to now a small unit that runs for $250 that can do whatever you want up to 500 kilograms. Like, yeah, some tech has gotten better.
Some things have improved.
Man, I feel like that was, I mean, we went all over the place on that conversation, but that was, I don't have any other questions, thoughts. Do you guys have any?
I got one more question. Jason, tell me 3 things that are getting you on your soapbox as of recently in the PT sport performance medicine world.
Oh, even more recently. Okay, 3 things. I mean,
you don't even need to do 3 things. That's just like a cap. So if you only got like 1 or 2, that's fine.
I mean, rate of force development is always one of them, because it's like we're so not good at just like accurately collecting peak force, but then now we suddenly are so attracted to this idea of let's measure accelerative properties of something. We don't need to get into the full rant, but that's one of them. Let's see. Training hip flexors, I think, is always just kind of a spicy and controversial topic, because it is in intra-articular hip pain. It's the thing that you see the most arthrogenic muscle inhibition with. And so if we use our Neanderthal brain and say, this thing like knee, quad get inhibited in knee. And then you move to the hip and you're like, hip flexor inhibited, must smash. It never goes well. And so there are like clear differences, like, oh, it turns out the hip is not the knee. The thing that it gets arthrogenic muscle inhibition, we either can't or we don't know the best way yet to just like blast it back to life. I wouldn't recommend stimming it because there are like some important nerves in that area. So maybe don't do that. But yeah, it is. I mean, we obviously we play around with a lot of different stuff. Different types of like training from the top down versus bottom up, or like starting in the position of quote unquote impingement and working your way out of it with like an eccentric hip flexor exercise, which tends to honestly be the most tolerated for the greatest number of people. But it's also this really difficult kind of like you don't know sometimes when it's the right time to start training it, because everything can be good and then you start training it and things are not good anymore. And then you're like, damn, I just really messed up a good thing here because I tried to get greedy. Yeah, so it's certainly not as simple as just never train them, or they're not tight, they're just weak, so start training them. The classic tropes that you probably see on both either social media or like surgical post-op protocol. Let's see, one more good one here. Man, I'm just trying to think about some of the really terrible articles that we've had to read and review lately. This was one. I mean, this is a super niche thing to be annoyed about, but there are some papers that report strength testing normalized, but normalized to BMI instead of normalized to moment, arm, and body weight, right? So it's still reported in Newton meters per kilogram because the BMI is reported in meters per kilogram. But it's like obviously not the same kind of Newton meters per kilogram that you're used to. Yeah. So that's a thing that I've seen more than once, which is more than one time that I've ever wanted to see it in my life.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a good one. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, so don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, yeah.
I don't know if we needed to specify to not do that.
Do not do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, that was good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got nothing else. That's it. That's all I wanted.
Yeah, well, cool. Jason, thank you for hopping on. I feel like this has been a long time coming, but if people have listened this far, we appreciate it. Hopefully you've enjoyed. And if you have enjoyed, we always appreciate nice reviews on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or if you're watching our lovely faces on YouTube, then leave a like. Thanks.